Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Parent Power. This is a podcast about the Virtual Academy, and we have an awesome mama on the call with us tonight. And hopefully Tyrone will be joining us at some point to help us out. But so happy to have you as always. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat and make comments in the chat. We're a small crew tonight, so help liven it up by chiming in. All right, so Mama Brick, do you want to say a little bit? I'd ask you to introduce yourself, but you're a little bit anonymous tonight. Would you like to say anything about yourself so our listeners can kind of get a sense of your family and your virtual decisions? Cool.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. We live in Baltimore City, West Baltimore, to be more exact. I have one student in the Baltimore City public school system who has been in this public school system since second grade and is now a fifth grader and is attending the virtual learning program this school year.
Awesome. And so we know that the Virtual Academy is actually called Charm City Virtual, and it has launched. And we know that the program has a different kind of structure than, we all went through this virtual learning thing last year, but we know that the structure is a bit different this year. Could you talk about how it's structured and just how it works a little bit?
Sure. So this is kind of like the third school year being virtual, the first being where we first entered the pandemic and went virtual all of a sudden. So this being the first school year where it's more intentional in being a virtual learning program. Some key differences that we have noticed is that first, it being a setting where you know that it's going to be virtual the full school year. It may turn into being in person or something. So I think you can definitely see that in how intentional the different classrooms have been set up in the staffing around the program. So what that looks like, at least for us in the East Campus of the virtual learning program, at the fifth grade level, there's two classrooms for fifth grade where we're in one, and my student receives instruction from two fifth grade teachers for the core courses. And then they have the resource courses that are set up, like the art, music, dance type of things. And what that looks like is we're still in the Google Classroom as we were for the previous school years. But what we've noticed is that there's a lot more emphasis placed on creating a virtual community for the students. They have their own little school website where there's a recorded morning announcements for them every morning to listen to. There's more of the class dojo interaction for students and families, and a lot of school gear and stuff to just keep them a bit more connected. And there's a lot more social events for the students to help them with connecting with other classmates. So that's some key differences that we've noticed as we transition to this new school year, where a lot more attention has been placed on making it feel like a community for the students and for the families as well.
Cool. So what when you talk about the social activities, what are those like? Can you give us a sense?
Sure. I know that I am constantly hearing from my student about, I think they call them lunch bunches, where students are able to set up their own kind of lunch groups that they get to have on, I think, Friday afternoons, so that they're sitting and kind of eating lunch with some of their classmates, and they get to hang out with a shared interest that they have. So it might be I think there's a lunch bunch sometimes where they're telling each other just riddles and jokes because that's some of the interests that those group of students have, and others may have interest in like anime and stuff like that. So they get together and talk about the stuff that they're interested in. There's also the social events that the school does, like assemblies that will recognize students who I think they have like a bit of a point system and for some of the students where they gain points throughout the school day for things that they're engaging in, turning in assignments and things like that, and that they're able to um, accumulate points and be able to attend like special events and stuff for that.
Cool. So we have someone who's watching who said that she didn't know that virtual art classes were an option. And if she'd known, she would have applied. She is over the in-person teaching experience.
Yeah, the virtual art classes, there's an art teacher that, and the students do like their artwork at home, but then they're able to like take pictures of it. And they have this program, I think it's like called Artsonia or something like that, where the students are able to upload their artwork, and it's like a virtual gallery where they're able to display their artwork that they're doing in the class. So I think it's really cool. My student has been enjoying it.
It's great. So you walked us through some of the components of the virtual academy. What does a typical day look like? You mentioned lunch bunch, but does it resemble a typical day, or is it different than what we're used to?
So I think so Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays are kind of like a typical day. Their typical days on that looks the same, where at least at the fifth grade level, it's where the mornings are with one of the teachers where they're doing, like, for example, ELA and science. And then in the afternoons, they change over to the other teacher where they're doing math and social studies. And then they all have a break for lunch in the middle of the day. And during that afternoon portion is where they also will have a block, I think like 45 minutes of a resource class. So it's PE, health, art, one of those type of classes is in the afternoon for my student. And on Wednesdays, it looks a bit different, where they've kind of set up the days so that it flows nicely, even when it's on one of those half days, early dismissal days. So the morning is more filled with the core learning subjects. And then the afternoon is filled with some of more of the resource type things. That way, when it does fall on an early dismissal day, they still have had that instructional time. And so I think they start off the day with like those morning announcements that I mentioned earlier, that's been recorded. So they'll see the principals or other administrators and stuff on the campuses, and they'll take them through. I think on Fridays, they do a little trivia question that the students are able to send in answers to win a special prize or something like that. So they start the day off watching the morning announcements before going into their core work.
Gotcha. So we've heard from some families that they were not interested initially in the virtual option because they heard there wasn't going to be the same access to resource classes.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like that's entirely true, though. So I'm curious, if you agree that that is not true, but also curious if there are other places where you may have made compromises to be part of the program. Are there things that are missing?
Mm-hmm. I think first, I think there was just a lot of confusion when information regarding the virtual learning program finally did start coming out, even around acceptance and stuff. It was pretty like a couple of weeks leading into the school year. So I think it really just wasn't enough time for parents to really fully understand what was involved in the program and some of the details that were newly coming out were different maybe than what was shared in the town halls and stuff that the public school system was doing leading up to during the application period. So at least for our family, the extracurricular activities that my students involved in wasn't dependent on them being a student at a particular school. So it didn't necessarily impact my students' extracurricular activities, but I do recall when we were participating in some of the information sessions leading up to it. I think if you have a student that's playing a particular sport where it is dependent on them being in a physical school building because it's that school's team, I think that is where some families had a tougher choice to make because the virtual learning program don't have those type of sports set up, at least at this stage. I don't know what that may look like or could look like in the future, but that was one of the compromises that families were looking at. And I think the same is true around some of the other types of, I think it depended on the type of school you were in. Like, so if you were in a school where they were doing language immersion, you're definitely not going to see that, or at least right now, that's not how it's going to look in this virtual learning program. So I think those are the type of compromises that families were looking at.
That makes sense. So your general tone about it sounds pretty upbeat. Would you share a bit more about what are you liking about it? And if there's anything that could be better?
All right. So my family's experience with the Baltimore City Public School System has been disastrous overall. And so when we hit the pandemic and stuff, I actually found having to engage with the public school system in a remote virtual environment to be safer and less traumatic and less stressful than being in person. So, and that didn't change. There were just things that were still happening when we were in a virtual environment where I was still uncomfortable engaging with school administrators, still uncomfortable engaging with teachers and things where I was considering homeschooling as an alternative. And so when the virtual learning program was announced, I looked at it as maybe being an alternative to homeschooling. So we applied to it just to see how it could maybe work out for our family. And so far, I have been impressed. This has been so far the best experience we've had since we've been a part of the Baltimore City Public School System. The teachers are very, very, I think it's even been built in. I think the virtual learning program, Charm City Virtual, the principals and stuff at each of the campus were very intentional with setting up a process where families remained informed and very engaged. From the start, they've even already have started the process of setting up a PTO. They heard our request for that during the first couple of meetings, and they got it set up in place immediately. And so there's already PTO meetings happening so that parents can engage with one another in addition with teachers and administrators. I think that I like that I am treated as a partner in my child's educational experience because that's what it is. I'm responsible ultimately for my child's education, and I've chosen Baltimore City Public Schools as my partner in meeting my child's academic needs. And I should not be treated as though I can't even enter a school building and stuff and engage with teachers and stuff. And I've had experiences where I've done an observation day or something like that, and I'm treated as though, why are you in the building? And so when I'm engaging with teachers and things now, I like that I'm getting responses. I'm being treated as a partner and recognized as the partner that I am in this process, and just open communication, in that the individualization of the education plan for my student is really great. And that's even without having any IEP or anything. Every student is receiving like an individualized educational plan and have resources and stuff that's tailored to their academic needs, which has been really great and what was needed for our family.
That sounds amazing. I'm curious, in terms of the, for a lot of people, the social environment, and I'm speaking personally too, because while my daughter did academically well during the virtual year, the loss of the social environment was
Mm.
crushing. I'm just curious how, is just the way your child, sorry, is built. Like how is that, how are you meeting those needs, or is it just less of
Mhm.
a need for your young person?
Oh, my daughter is, she has like, she's a performer. My daughter, some of her activities is like dance and theater and things like that. So being thrust into the virtual environment, and particularly given that she is in a household where she's the only child, was devastating for her. And that was tough for her to get adjusted to, that there was no other children to play with. And how to do that, and even just sitting down for lunch, like, who am I talking to and stuff like that. And I'm not as cool, so she was not that thrilled that I was always the lunch mate. So that was a major concern when we decided that we were going to stay with being virtual for this school year. But the way that they set up the virtual learning program, and heard from the parents that you cannot move forward in this without giving us some answers about this social aspect of it. And immediately we saw the lunch bunches and stuff popping up, like what type of other activities can we do to get the students engaged with one another. There's activities, was it literacy nights and stuff like that. There's even parent cafe type stuff that's been set up at the school and stuff now too. And so when it comes to this school year, I think socially she has been enjoying it a lot more than she was previously, because she knows now what her opportunities are to engage with other students, and knows how she can take advantage of those. And then we also have the little cheat that because she's involved in other activities outside of Baltimore City Public Schools, she does have a few things that she does do in person. And so that's been a huge help as well.
Mhm. Wow. Sounds like there's a lot that the virtual academy has figured out. That's really helpful. I'm curious, you mentioned just how, let's see, I'm trying to remember what my question was. I just slipped my mind. Oh, I know what I was going to say. You mentioned how there was something about the in-person environment that really wasn't good for your family. I know that I don't know if you want to say anything more about that. I know there's people that, whose children get bullied in schools, or
Mhm.
it also sounds like maybe you had that it wasn't good for you as a parent either.
Mhm.
Is there anything more that you want to say about that? You don't have to, but I'm just curious, like what, you feel welcomed in a way that you didn't before.
Mhm.
Um, is there more to that story?
I think just even from the start of entering the public school system, we started off with a charter school, who ultimately that school year did lose their charter. So we were going to have to change schools the following school year anyways. And we ended up, during that school year, like, I'm a single parent. I also maintain a full-time job. And so I when I'm looking for schools in the public school system, there were some key things that I asked schools and stuff to be sure that we had what we needed in place so that I could best support her needs and also keep our family going. And so I remember key things that I asked the summer leading up when we were selecting a school, and ultimately went with the charter school, was what the air conditioning and heating situation was at the school. Asked about the before and after care programming. And so those two factors were key in our school, for our school, what we needed in a school. And once we started the school year, I think it was maybe 2 days into that school year, that I got a notice that the school was closing because it was basically a cold red day and the school didn't have adequate air conditioning. And I was left like, what do you mean? Because when we toured the school, you said that the school had air conditioning and it was fine. And apparently they didn't know that they were on the city's list of being at building with inadequate air conditioning. So they would be closed when the school was closing schools without air conditioning. And so that was one thing where it's just like, okay, this is really going to wreck life for me because I don't have the flexibility in the job that I had at that time to be able to accommodate those type of closings. And then we ran into the issue of the school losing resources such as the before and after care programming. And that was a huge hit as well, because at the time that school was starting, I was already supposed to be at work for an hour. So, and then school closing during the time that I was supposed to still be at my desk. So we ended up actually changing schools midway through the school year to make sure that, or, in hopes that it would keep us from running into any major issues, because I was already experiencing issues around those type of circumstances. And so changed schools to another, this was a regular public school where we encountered issues around I'll say that I think sometimes it's not, I think what I constantly see in more than one environment that I've been in is kind of like this white savior complex that happens in school settings. And there were things that were happening where assumptions were being made about my child, our family, that, or because they heard certain language, made certain assumptions, where if they had taken a moment to actually speak to the parent or something like that, clarity could have been given and understanding before things escalated to being far more than it should have been. And that is what our family experienced, things escalating that shouldn't have. We had an incident where my child was falsely accused of bullying. This was during the virtual environment, where my child was falsely accused of bullying because they said that something had happened under the login of her account. But I was able to determine by looking at my child's account settings that someone else had signed into her account because they were having all the students use the same password. And if they had taken the moment to look into it, rather than having a meeting with my student and telling her that they could tell that she did it because it was under her profile name and picture, and causing her to get upset in the middle of the school day from being falsely accused of something, we could have avoided a lot of that. Incidences that happened in the building around it was too many things. I had to address too many staff persons about certain things that they were doing, certain comments that they were making that were just inappropriate. And it became very exhausting and tiring. And so that's why I considered, once the pandemic hit and I didn't have to go into the building and deal with people, to be a relief. And when we had the issue with still running into issues it was just, there were so many things around teachers and school administrations wanting to do like their Black Lives Matter type things. I don't think I shared that I'm also a Black woman. There were just certain things that were coming up around proclaiming that Black Lives Matter, but it not showing up in my experience in that community. And when we spoke up about that, other families spoke up about that not reflecting in our experiences in that school community, the principal's response was to tell the staff and faculty that they couldn't engage in any conversations with us on the matter. And so if you're ignoring me on a topic such as this, what else do we have to talk about? So I just didn't see that as a school that we should continue with.
Yeah, that's a lot. So total breakdown of communication and not understanding. Um, so I'm curious. We've heard that the virtual academy might have more girls than boys. I'm wondering if this is true and if that has a consequence on the academy, if that is in fact the case.
Yeah, I think this is something that I had to ask my I did ask my daughter about this once we seemed like the classes had kind of settled and everyone was where they were going to be. I only see it from the East Campus perspective because it is set up like the East and West Campus. So we have a better view of like the 5th grade level on the East Campus, but I would say that it does seem like it is more heavy on girls after looking at like her classrooms. And I don't fully know what that means. I know some of the selection criteria that happened around this was around academic. I think the term that they used was like successful academic progress or something during virtual learning up to that point, which I think definitely put some families at a disadvantage. I think, my student definitely had some advantages going into the virtual learning setting once the pandemic hit. Like she already owned a Chromebook, for example, that she was able to get set up on immediately once the pandemic hit. So we didn't have to wait for devices to be issued to us. We had high-speed internet already in our home, though I did have to upgrade it to get her through virtual learning settings and stuff. And I think, I also was able to sit down and teach her. Like I had to teach her pretty much 3rd grade once the pandemic hit. And I was able to sit down and do that. I was able to understand the content and go through and keep her kind of caught up. And that was definitely a privilege, that our family had in going into that. My job transition to being remote, lots of people didn't. So I think that alone, put some families at a disadvantage or some students at a disadvantage when it came to what was going to be considered, one of the eligibility criteria for getting into the virtual learning or being accepted into the virtual learning program.
I'm curious because it seems like they only accepted about 1,000 people. And that's, from what I understand, that's divided across all the grades. Given how successful it seems like it is, and how thoughtful it is in its setup, why do you think the academy is so small?
I think that's maybe so the academy may seem small in that number, but my student is not in a small classroom. Her classroom, just her homeroom alone, has around 30 something students in it. And I think that's a lot for in-person. And so that's definitely a lot for virtual, given that you're trying to engage students that aren't physically in front of you. And there's no like assistant teacher in this classroom. This is one teacher. And so, and I think that's true for the other 5th grade class on the East Campus. And I would suspect that it looks that way on the West Campus as well. So I think part of it, I'm not sure if it was intentional to keep the classrooms small, but I think there was also probably some challenges leading in on Baltimore City Public School, like the district side, even around staffing and hiring, because I do recall in the town halls leading up to it and some of the materials that came out is that recruitment seemed a bit restricted to where while they were accepting applications from across the country from teachers, it seemed that they were not maybe allowing teachers currently teaching in Baltimore City Public Schools to switch to the virtual program. And I'm not sure how that may have impacted numbers, but that was one thing that I noticed that I thought was interesting and maybe impacted how they were able to staff the program.
That's really interesting. I did not know that. Okay, we have a couple comments. So thanks, Alexis, for listening. She says that our daughter's first grade class at Charm City East is pretty evenly split between boys and girls. Okay, so I'm collecting anecdotal evidence here. So that's good to know. I had heard that maybe there were more girls than boys. I'd heard it from a in-person class that there seemed to be a lot more boys than girls. And I wondered, I wonder if the virtual academy has siphoned off the girls that could kind of manage sitting still for longer, or, I wasn't just, so thanks for checking that out with me. And then Yvette, who's a great educator, says the academy is small because they didn't want many scholars to participate, as they wanted all scholars to return to in-person learning since virtual school was ineffective, according to them. So them is, I'm assuming we're talking about the district. The enrollment time was cut super short and under advertised. And Alexis also says, our teacher said they had to move kids from some of the West Side first grade classes to her class, which only started out with 16 kids, to their class because West Side had huge 36 kids in classes. So thank you. Thanks for providing that information.
Yeah, I think the split between the East and West campus happened. I think there's even information on Charm City Virtual's program around this, but it was kind of based on their home school. So basically the school that they were like transferring from determined which campus they were placed in. So while, for example, we live in West Baltimore, but my student was in a school that was considered to be East. So they were placed in the East campus.
Got it. So there was some effort to maintain some community from where you came from, maybe, even though you're no longer associated with your home school. Okay. All right. So I'm curious. Will you return to school buildings at some point? It sounds like this has been a really good experience for you and your daughter. Or does this seem like this is a long-term option? You also mentioned homeschooling. Like, will you return to school buildings?
That is yet to be determined. I think if I were to completely close it off, I think my daughter will be devastated. I definitely, we're at the stage, like I said, we're in 5th grade now. So this is a transition point for us where we're looking at middle schools and stuff. It is not, I know that they've greenlit virtual learning program for this school year. I don't think it has been confirmed that it will be available for next school year. So I consider Charm City Virtuals to be one of our middle school options, and fingers crossed that it will still be available for that. But we are looking at other in-person options as well.
And I guess now that you have this experience of being treated well, being treated as a partner, having your involvement be welcomed, I'm curious, what do you have different expectations of going back to an in-person space? What do you hope would be different? Or what wouldn't you tolerate now in an in-person environment?
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting to see also, even with how COVID-19 has affected some of the school protocols and stuff. I'm one of those parents. I do an observation day where I go in and spend the whole school day with my child. I follow to every classroom. I want to know, I want to see teachers' faces. I want them to see my face. And I want to see what's going on, be familiar with what's going on, the flow throughout the day. And I think, I'm concerned of how new protocols and stuff that may be put into place for schools now, how that type of involvement would be treated. And because that's huge for me. Like, I need to see what's going on. I need to see the flow today. I have experience where I would get a progress report telling me one thing, but when I go into the school building, I can understand. I've gone into classrooms where, the teachers are fussing at the students for not paying attention and stuff like that, saying that it was a tough day. But I was in the classroom and I didn't even want to pay attention. I wanted to be laid out on the floor too, because I was bored. So, and it's that type of thing that I just find helpful. Like, I can better understand my students' point of view. I can better understand the teacher's point of view if I'm able to go in and observe too. And I'm also able to, I think, the thing that I said is that there's no reason for me to find out something new when I get a progress report or a report card. If it's the first time it's being mentioned, it's in this progress report or report card, the person who wrote it is wrong, because I am accessible. I'm available by email. If you're doing Class Dojo, Remind, or whatever system you are, I've signed up for it. You are able to reach me there. So I shouldn't be hearing anything for the first time through this document that's going to exist in my child's record for the rest of their academic career. So, if we're in person, there's just certain things like that, like my ability to be able to go into school buildings and still have that open access is important to me. So I think that's something that I just wouldn't tolerate, like not being able to engage in certain ways and being able to do that in person. Just as you're engaging my child in person, I want to see what body language you're using when you're engaging with my child and other people's children, and things like that. Other things that I want to see if we were to go back into like an in-person environment is, I just found there's something about the fact that when you wanted to make sure that families were returning back to the classrooms, turning back to the schools, somehow we were able to figure out getting soap and stuff into the buildings. But before, when we were mentioning that there weren't soap, paper towels, bathrooms there's water fountains that we can't drink out of. It was, no one had answers for it, or, there was shoulder shrug. But now that it was time to get us back in, or you've made national news calling you out on something, now the dollars have appeared. And so we have to rebuild that type of trust. Like, I need to understand why you were able to find the money now and how you're going to keep finding it once you're getting us back into the buildings. So it's things like that I would need to hear from the public school system as well as the school.
Yeah. Well, you're getting lots of love from the viewers. There's a flurry of thumbs up and hearts as you just shared what you want to have be different about schools. So thanks for saying all that. I love that idea of shadowing your child for a day. I do think I would love to do that. I think that's such a great idea. So we have a few more comments in the chat. Yvette says, current public school teachers were originally blocked from applying to teach in the virtual school. Then it was open to teachers to apply, but with a super short time frame to apply. And she knows teachers who tried to teach in the academy, but were denied. So I don't know what that's interesting. I don't know what the criteria was or what the thinking was there. Why did we go? Were we trying to stave off a shortage in the in-person environment, or what? I don't know. I wonder what we were thinking there. That's a thing to investigate. Yeah, and then Yaja is just appreciating you for I think for your feistiness as a mama, and agreeing with you. So thank you for all your wisdom. So we are winding down a bit. Are there other things that we missed that you want to share about your experience? Or have any final thoughts for listeners?
I think I really hope that this is something that continues, because what I really want to lift up is that, it wasn't COVID that was our main concern when it came to returning to the building. It was really how our family was being treated in the school system. And so I think that that has to remain a topic, and that public school system, the district, has to own up to the fact that families weren't feeling safe in the schools prior to the pandemic. And so when you are saying that people need to return back to the buildings and stuff, that's the best place for learning, and just using grades as your measurement of that, it doesn't give you the full picture, and it doesn't tell the full truth, because people have been, banging on the walls saying that there's issues and our families' needs, our students' needs aren't being met. And so I think that is something that has to be addressed in this process. And if, recognizing that for some, it's been safer, better for their physical health, better for their mental health, and better for their academic needs to be in this virtual learning environment. So I do like the idea that it's an alternative for students. If there's students who do, for whatever their situation is, where they have to even have maybe more of an asynchronous experience, I hope that those needs are being met as they start to really look at how they can better meet the academic needs of students, and understand and recognize that it doesn't have to be this traditional thing that we've been pushing that clearly doesn't work for everyone. Sitting in a classroom in a seat for so many hours in a row does not work for everyone. And so I think, as they're looking at this virtual learning piece, I hope that how in-person instruction is happening is relooked at too, and continues to be relooked at, and recognize that just like I don't sit in my chair for that many hours when I'm at work, I have to get up and move around, so do the students. And how can we better meet what that should look like even in person for students?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is like a true reimagining of school, that, what
Yeah.
you're experiencing is a really different setup that's actually meeting your child's needs very differently than what was happening before. That's so important. And how, if we kept following that train, like how else could we re-envision?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that my daughter was wearing one of those watches that counted her steps, and when she went back to school in person, I was like, oh my gosh, you barely moved. It was
Right.
to me, like I knew that they weren't playing, because her watch was telling me how much she was. But Yvette says again, she's sorry that you guys had that type of experience prior to your transition to virtual school. Keep fighting and pushing for what's best for your littles. Yes, Yvette. I think, Mama Brick, you are a testament to fighting for your little one. And yeah, I really appreciate your thinking, and just what an activist mom of a public school kid you are. So thank you so much for coming on.
And thank you. I love Teachers Democracy Project. So I appreciate giving me the space to come and share our story, and hope to have other top opportunities to connect with the families and stuff that you reach.
Yes, well, thank you. Yvette says, oh no, we play daily in our class in school, recess daily, and lots of psychomotor activities. Yes, we want all our kids to have you as a teacher, Yvette. It's a shame that there's only one of you. We want to clone you. All right. Well, take care again, everybody. Thanks for listening, tuning in, and sharing your comments. We appreciate you. We appreciate you, Mama Brick.
Thank you.